Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. A brand new sprint weekend format has been confirmed in a surprising move for this weekend's Azerbaijan Grand Prix. I'm going to do my best today to explain what it is, how it works, and is it actually any good. Very much intrigued to hear your thoughts on it in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. Let's dive straight into it here from Chris Medland's confirmation from F1 as well, that an entirely new sprint weekend format has been approved. So usually what happens on a sprint weekend is you have Friday practice, then Friday qualifying. That sets the grid for Saturday's sprint. You then do the sprint on Saturday with an FP2 session before, and then the sprint results determine the grid for Sunday, and then you go for the Grand Prix weekend. Now, that is being changed to what you can think about it as a two-day weekend. Think of Saturday as an entirely separate occasion. It's a two-day Grand Prix weekend. Qualifying on Friday, just after one practice session, as usual on the Friday, but Saturday with the sprint is entirely irrelevant from the way that Friday connects to Sunday, as in the qualifying on Friday sets the grid for Sunday and Saturday is entirely standalone. So we'll dive into more details on how the qualifying part works, but now the grid for the sprint on Saturday is determined by a sprint shootout, which is another qualifying session with a different format we'll see in a second. These terms they love to throw around now, Formula 1, but yeah, sprint shootout they're calling it for the sprint grid on Saturday, and that's going to be an entirely separate occasion. So we'll see more details here in a second. Just some confirmation on how grid penalties work, that let's say grid penalties from FP1 and Friday apply to the race. Mostly they apply to the race. Parc ferme breaches mean a pit lane start in both sprint and race. Power unit penalties only apply to the race, and other penalties generally just apply to the race, but grid penalties in the sprint shootout apply to the sprint. So complicated stuff, that's how it works. This though is the brand new weekend structure for the sprint weekends. There will be 6 of them like this season. The rumour was it was only going to come in at the second Grand Prix weekend, which has a sprint. Now look, if F1 got their way, they'd probably do this every weekend, which I don't want to see, but still, we're going to have 6 weekends like this, and it does make things kind of interesting. So as normal, practice one on Friday, and then qualifying for the Grand Prix. Then Saturday, an entirely separate occasion, a sprint shootout just to set the grid for the sprint, and then the sprint itself. The benefit of this is that the issues with the previous format, right, was that the sprint set the order for the Grand Prix, and therefore any upsets or interesting things in qualifying would usually get, mulled over, right? Let's just say Kevin Magnussen stuck it on pole last year at the Brazilian Grand Prix, but he was down in P8, I think, at the end of the sprint. So, all that good, cool story got undone by the time it got to Sunday's Grand Prix. Also, the issue with the sprint is no one wants to take any risk. Verstappen would prefer to sit P3 for the entire sprint and ensure that he survives, rather than go for a risky move for P2 and potentially crash out and have to start from the back on Sunday. Now that's no longer a thing, because going for that lunge into P2, that gets you an extra point, because points are given out for the sprint, 8 for first, 1 for 8th, and it goes, 8, 7, 6 down the grid. So there's an importance in actually going for that, whereas before drivers just effectively it was all preservation, right? They wanted to just get to the end of the sprint and make it through it, rather than actually have a fun race, which is what we want to see. So I think this is beneficial. The sprint shootout though, an entirely separate qualifying session for the sprint. I don't believe this is being done in the best way. I would prefer this to be a one-lap shootout type thing, effectively how it was back in, 2004, 2005, when the drivers would go out one at a time, and you would get to see every single lap, and they had one chance to do it, like one-shot qualifying is what it's called in the Formula 1 game, and I would like to see something like that come back, but they're doing this way. So there's Q1, Q2, Q3 as normal, but first of all, they're mandating tyre compounds. Now, we've heard that they've wanted to do this for some time, and I think they're going to try it maybe in Imola later this year in the actual, like a normal weekend with no sprints. Now, there's medium mandated for Q1, a medium time mandated for Q2, and then a soft for Q3. Bit strange, don't exactly know why. In fairness, back, even a couple of years ago, they used to always run mediums in Q2, the top teams, because they wanted to ensure that they could start on those tyres, because that was the rules then, that the tyre you got through to Q3 on in Q2 was the same exact tyre you had to start on in the race, so they often would try and qualify on mediums. But now that's a mandated part of the sprint weekend. So yeah, just to clarify, and I think the most succinct way to say it from Chris Medland's perspective is, it's now a 2-day Grand Prix weekend of FP1 and quali on Friday, the race on a Sunday, and then to fill the gap, there's a shorter day on Saturday with a short quali and a short race. There's no impact on the Grand Prix itself, and it's probably an hour of total track time on the Saturday, but it's all action, it's all go the entire time. So is this any good? That's obviously a debate to be had. I like a normal Grand Prix weekend of FP1, 2, 3, quali, race, you know, that's how I am, but I don't mind the occasional sprint. I think it does make things interesting, and I do feel like this format is superior to the previous version we had, where both races, the sprint and the race itself, should be made more entertaining as a result of this. So I like it. The issue is that if this goes well, it's kind of more MotoGP style, that we might start to get your boy Stefano Domenicali say, you know what, we're going to do this every weekend. And, you know, the teams probably wouldn't be so happy about that. Some drivers like it, some drivers don't. We've seen that Red Bull absolutely hate all sprint weekends and anything about them, whereas Hamilton and Russell lately have said, you know what, we actually quite enjoy a good additional race because, you know, we're here to race, here to enjoy racing, so one extra race can't be bad from their perspective. So it's Austria next, then Spa, then Qatar, Austin and Brazil to close out the year. So pretty interesting stuff, but I thought it was going to come in Austria, but no, it is starting this weekend in Baku. The other piece of the puzzle here, of course, is only one practice session to get the setup right for 6 Grand Prix. Some teams have struggled with this in the past, most notably Red Bull last season when they had a sprint weekend. Brazil, Austria was one example. They didn't seem to get the car in the right window, and there's been rumours lately that with how Red Bull have set up their car with this incredible anti-squat, anti-dive suspension, it takes them longer to actually set up that properly for the weekends than it does for other teams. And we've even seen so far this season that often it will take them 2-3 practice sessions to really get where they want to be. So that might be one idea why Red Bull don't want to do sprint weekends, because it means they get less practice to go through, but it does open the door to more interesting weekend results. So I'm not really opposed to these changes, but the idea of a sprint shootout, I think they could do it better. It's a bit of a confusing one, but I think that it should improve what is currently a rather controversial sprint format in general. Plenty of other news to discuss though. This another big one coming out of Formula 1 itself, and this is probably even bigger than I'm going to mention it here in terms of time length, but now for the rest of the season, 4 power unit elements are allowed each. So 4 internal combustion engines, 4 MGUKs, that's the kinetic part on the braking, 4 MGUHs, that's the heat recovery part of the energy recovery system, the ERS, and then 4 turbos. Usually you're only allowed 3 of these. So this is a big deal. Of course, it comes just after George Russell had his engine blow up in Australia, of course. But obviously this is, I think, necessary, right? 3 power units to go the entire season on with all these additional sprint races and 23 races on the year. Like, it's just not going to work, you know what I mean? Parts just are not going to last. So they're allowing up to 4 now. Now, I would not be surprised. I think Christian Horner said this in the past, that if they allow 3, we will use 4. If they allow 4, we will use 5, because it's more beneficial to the teams to run their parts at a higher level, a higher output, and 1 race a year take a penalty than it is to try and conserve. So we'll see, but that's a pretty big update, it's got to be said. Also, big update coming out of Ferrari. Laurent Mekies, who's this figure on the left-hand side, you'll probably see him on telly from time to time, will leave Maranello and join AlphaTauri. He's walked into the wrong Scuderia, it seems, because, yeah, the Ferrari race director will work alongside Franz Tost, with whom he's already worked before. So this is going to occur in either this year or in 2024. Big change, to be fair. There's rumours from Gianna De Kessa that they probably won't comment on this yet. Vasseur tried to convince him to stay, but that's not happening. It's a wonder whether Vigna, in charge of Ferrari, has either made this call or who's actually calling the shots there. But there's been lots of discussion lately, even from Elkan and co, that there are profound changes within the walls of Maranello, and they are potentially making serious changes to try and revitalise any Charles Leclerc hope that he has left in what Ferrari can achieve going forwards. Another part of this story actually was talking about AlphaTauri, because he's joining them, and saying that Red Bull have been given offers for $800 million to buy AlphaTauri as the Formula 1 spot, which they have rejected. So I think that they even said recently that maybe $1 billion, and they'd say yes, or they were talking about it might be $1 billion worth of a spot, and maybe it's just not up for sale. But you know, I have raised the question before, what about if Honda came in and thought, you know what, let's buy AlphaTauri? Would be a very interesting story. But for now, it seems the spot is not for sale, but Laurent Mekies will be joining them, which is quite the surprise, to be honest. And just finally to mention here, coming out of James Allison and Mercedes, it's quite clear to me when you listen to the words of James Allison about their car and the development, why he is the better man to have in charge of your engineering team than Mike Elliott. Just in terms of, like, if you were working for this guy with what he's about to say here, you would definitely be cracking on and very optimistic about the potential. So he talked about how he just feels like he's better suited to this short-term fight for the championship with the W14, and Mike Elliott is the better chess player, looking at the more long-term situation. So James Allison stepping back in as technical director for the project, Mike Elliott stepping up to the CTO, thinking more long-term, more strategy perspective. I think it makes sense. And even he says, like, he wasn't very involved in the concept of the W14 when he was the CTO. They've now swapped jobs effectively. I was much less involved than I was as the technical director. I've been maneuvering more around the 2026 here and there in the current concept of the car. It was a fair chunk of effort to get back up to speed with everything and how things are currently in play with the championship fight. It also goes on to say some very interesting things about the state of their car, saying that every weekend upgrades are going to arrive. Every weekend you basically have a different car. Sometimes a few more pieces, sometimes a few less, but we have news for every race, and Baku will be no exception. In the end, you are forced to respect the cost cap. We are at a stage of the season where there is plenty of firepower to continue progressing from weekend to weekend. It has a very good pair of drivers driving it. It's better than most cars on the starting grid, but until it's the fastest, it will always be a weak car for all of us. It is suitably kind to its tyres, but not as kind as some of the cars have built in the past. It has more downforce than most of the cars on the grid, but it is not enough. Its handling characteristics leave something to be desired and definitely need to be improved, but none of this is a revelation. We talked about it almost every weekend, and that's part of what the team has to go through to get the winning material back into our hands. And going on to say, to close out his statements here, we are completely realistic about the significant performance of the Red Bull, and particularly Max. They are going to be an extremely worthy opposition to hunt down and in due course overtake. So it's those type of statements there from James Allison about what Mercedes are planning and what they are intending to do in the near future, about overtaking Red Bull, not even just catching them up, because that was the discussion from Mike Elliott and others. We're going to try and catch them up type stuff. James Allison's like, no, we're going to overtake him. It's a matter of, when, not if. And talking about the amount of firepower they have in terms of upgrades, and you can see why this guy is probably better suited to this role, not exactly in terms of intellectually from like an actual engineering perspective, but just leading the team. This guy makes more sense, right? And obviously James Allison has what he's achieved over his career to back those statements up as well. So very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. Just one final thing to close out here. Charles Leclerc released a song on Spotify. I believe it was a piano piece. I haven't had the chance to listen to it yet, and I think it was down. Now it might be back up soon. So yeah, people were very impressed, I thought. We know Charles Leclerc can play piano very well, so thought that was pretty cool as a little spring break piece of juice. But very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I will see you next time.